Sure you all heard the now recording that we're familiar with from Zoom. Hi, everybody. Greetings. I'm Leslie Conwell. I wear a number of hats. I'm the operations manager, the Feast of the Hunter's Moon event manager, and also the program director. And we want to welcome you to the History Center. This is really wonderful to see such a great crowd here on a Saturday afternoon. We appreciate you coming out. A couple housekeeping details here. Where's the food? We'll be bringing out food and refreshments immediately following the program. We thought some of you might want to stay and mingle and talk to Ms. Hunter and learn some more after the program. And where are the restrooms? The women's is this way and the men's is down the hall. TCHA operates many different sites. We have the History Center. It's available for rental, by the way. And so if you're interested in that, be sure and let me know. Be happy to talk to you about that. We've got a newly refurbished auditorium that's really, really beautiful. We operate the Arkenbright Genealogy Library that has so much of our collections and archives, and you can learn about local history and your history. And we've got Fort Weatnan, which of course we'll be learning a little
So people can't hear.
I went ahead and turned on my audio here to see if that made a difference. Make a sense. So the audio is on.
On here, looks like there's two Leslie Martins. The wrong one got unmuted. Yeah, I'm fine. Okay, that's, yeah. So that's you. Or your co-host, right? Let's see what participants are. Yeah, see, the little thing's going up and down indicates that she's being heard. Her microphone is still inactive and she's speaking.
Still have the blue, the Bluetooth tails.
Huh?
Do we have a Bluetooth tails?
Creek, because Wea is the name that the Waiatanuki later became known as. And today they are called Wea. And we can see the red dot here that shows us where Waiatanonge, the place of the Wea, is. And of course, that's where we are today. So our first contact with Europeans came after, we don't know, again, we don't know time periods here, but after a while, we had contact with the Europeans, but not directly initially. It was by way of disease,
Where you might turn it
and
down
also
so-
by way of trade goods. And so we were getting things from the Europeans long before we had seen the Europeans. Now, one day, some Wyandots came to us and said, "You've got to come see this. It's the strangest thing. You've got to come up to the lake." And the lake they were talking about is Lake Huron. We went up to Lake Huron with them, and there were these creatures. Maybe they were people, but they sure didn't look like us. And they had strange boats. They were the French. And I'm not exactly sure what kind of interaction. It certainly wasn't a face-to-face conversation because they left. I think we scared them off. And the French do not have this story. They did not go back and record that they got scared off. But we have the story. During the Beaver Wars, which was the mid-1600s, war was coming toward us in what is now Indiana. And we did not want to be a part of it. Get us away from this, get us out. We don't want to be here. So we moved west into what is today Illinois and north into what is today Wisconsin. And it was during this period that we once again encountered the French in a better situation. The French that we encountered were Jesuit missionaries and French traders. Now we had been, as I said, been getting things through trade, but now we had the traders right there and we could get all kinds of goods from those French traders. And we liked that. Ladies, imagine your whole life and your grandmother's life and their grandmother's life, you've been cooking in a clay pot. I know this had to happen because it certainly would happen to me. You got dinner in your pot, right? And you're bringing it out to serve your family and you trip. And not only does dinner spill, but you drop the pot and it breaks. And there goes your whole dinner, right? Well, in trade, we got metal pots and they didn't break when you dropped them. And not only that, as you probably can guess, metal pots cooked better than clay pots. So that's just an example of why we liked some of the trade goods that we were getting and why we were happy to trade for these objects. Well, just after 1700, it was safe to come home. And so we came back to some of these same places, some of these same village areas where we had been for who knows how long before the Beaver Wars. And you know, the French came with us. They liked trading with us too. And some of the French decided to establish a trading fort. And they had been trading with the Wayatanonge. And so they wanted a fort near them to trade. And so they built a fort across the river from the Wayatanonge, and they called it Fort Wiatnan, which was their way of pronouncing Wayatanonge. And those of you who know this area know that we now have the Wiatnan Preserve where that fort was. So we were trading with the French. Things were going well. Our lives were pretty much like they had been, except for these wonderful trade goods. About the 1750s or so, we also started trading with the British and getting goods from them. And then there was 1763, the Treaty of Paris. And in that treaty, the French ceded their rights in all of this land and more to the British. Now the French understood, well, at least the French who were on the ground with us, understood what their rights were. Their rights were to trade with us. Their rights were to live where we allowed them to live. They had diplomatic rights. But the British thought they now ruled the land. And they were going to tell us what to do and what we could do and what we couldn't do and how they were going to trade with us and what they were going to trade for. And we didn't like it. But then 20 years later, 1783, another Treaty of Paris, and the British cede their rights to this area and more to the Americans. Now, it was very clear that the Americans understood that this was their land, and they started coming on to their land. But we still understood that it was our land. We had had no part in either Treaty of Paris. We had not ceded our land. We had not sold our land. We had not given our land away. it was still Myaamiaki, the land of the Miami, as well as other tribes. We had shared territories with other tribes, and it was their land too. But it wasn't the Americans. They didn't even ask our permission to come onto our land, and they were coming, lots and lots of people onto our land. Think about it. Someone comes onto your property, they cut down your trees, and they build a house on your property. What are you going to do? You're going to get rid of them, get them off my land. Well, that's what we wanted to do too. And so we would attack these people that were on our land, and they would attack us back. And that led to a lot of skirmishes until ultimately the US Army got involved. And there were a number of battles, and we were successful. We and our allies from other tribes were successful in some of those battles. We particularly like to remember St. Clair's defeat, and we emphasize the defeat. St. Clair was leading the US Army, and it was and still is considered the greatest defeat of the US Army in history. So we were happy. We're going to keep them off of our land. That was 1791. Just 4 years later, excuse me, 3 years later, if I can do my math, 3 years later in 1794, there was another battle. It was the Battle of Fallen Timbers. And we lost that battle. And I think it must have been a shock to us because we had defeated St. Clair and his people so decisively. We had killed so many of their soldiers. And now here they're back again, and they've got more men to fight. And you know what? We don't have any more men. We have the men we have, and we've got no more. We aren't going to get any more. And even when we win a battle, some of our men get killed. And we're losing men and losing men. And not only that, but whether we win or lose, they come in and they burn down our cornfields, destroy our villages, destroy our food supplies. We can't sustain this. It's too much. We will not survive if we keep fighting this war. And so we agreed in 1795 to go to the Treaty of Greenville. Now am I stuck again? Huh. Okay, let's see if I can do it this way. Not sure what. There we go. Okay. So in the Treaty of Greenville, we ceded much of what is today Ohio and parts of what is today Indiana. And that was okay. It ended the war. We got peace. They had their land. We had our land. We were going to live as good neighbors in peace. Well, that didn't last too long because the Americans continued to come onto our land, and they're coming now into what is today southern Indiana, and then further and further in. And every time they come further, they want us to sign a treaty ceding more land. So let's see if these will work. So there was a treaty in 1805, and then in 1809. Now, if you remember your Indiana history, 1816 is when Indiana became a state. This right here, this green and yellow portion down here, that was Indiana when it became a state. All the rest, all north of that, that was still Myaamiaki. That was still Miami land. But just 2 years later, there was the Treaty of 1818. And in that, we ceded a large portion of land. And you can see here, actually, depending on where you are in Lafayette, probably most of the city today was ceded in 1818. And then there was a treaty in 1826, and we ceded most of the land north of the Wapashikissapewe, the Wabash River. But this treaty was different than the previous ones. In the past, they wanted us to cede the land to them. They would pay us annuities for the land. But this time, they wanted to exchange our land in Indiana for land west of the Mississippi River. And they wanted us to go to that land west of the Mississippi River. But we weren't interested in that. In fact, one of the negotiators for this treaty said it was impossible to procure the assent of the Potawatomis or Myamis to a removal west of the Mississippi. They are not yet prepared for this important change in their situation. You can read right in there, they know it's going to happen. They're going to make it happen. They can wait because we're not quite ready, but they're going to make it happen. They are going to move us west. But we were adamant. And they really had no leverage to make us go. We said no, they couldn't do anything about it. Until 1830, the Indian Removal Act. And by that law, they couldn't force us to remove, but it did allow legally that exchange of land that they wanted in that 1826 treaty, land in Indiana for land west of the Mississippi. And that just opened the door for more. In 1832, there was another statute, and I think the title of the law says it all. An act to enable the president to extinguish Indian title within the states of Indiana, Illinois, and the territory of Michigan. They want no Indian land in those areas. No more Indian land. We're going to get rid of it. And that just opened wide. The door was now wide open for Indian removal. And just 2 months later, US commissioners came to our council house at the Forks of the Wabash in what is today Huntington, Indiana. And they came to meet with our national council. I'll mention that council house was still in existence until the 1950s. That's why we actually have a photograph of it. What they wanted was land along the Wapashikissapewi, the Wabash River as they called it. But mostly what they wanted was for us to move west. And so the conversation, the first day of negotiations went like this. You should go west. We will not go. Think about it. We need a definite answer. We will not go. We'll talk again tomorrow. And do you know the conversation the next day went exactly the same way? They got nothing from us in this or the next negotiations. But finally, in October 1834, forgot about this. This is Pinjiwa, Chief Richardville. He was the principal chief of the Miami. And at that negotiation, he said to the negotiators, Father, we think our answer is good. You point to the west and you ask us to go there. There I shall never go, nor will my people. They are all opposed to leaving here. They will not sell their lands. I speak not for myself, but for my people. So he's leading the charge here, saying, no, we are not going west. But we did sign a treaty in 1834. But we didn't agree to go west. And we absolutely insisted that if we're going to sign a treaty, it has to include individual reserves. Now, individual reserves were lands that were reserved out of what we were ceding. So we're ceding this big piece of land, and little pieces here and there were reserved to individuals, individual Miami people, or to a family, or to a village. But they weren't tribal lands anymore, but they were Miami lands reserved out of what was ceded. And we weren't going to sign the treaty without it. And so the negotiators finally said, okay, we'll do that. But when the treaty went to President Andrew Jackson, he was not happy. He had told those negotiators not to allow individual reserves, and he refused to sign the treaty. I mean, he has been waiting to get this land, but because it had the individual reserves, he would not sign it. It was 3 years before we had a new president, President Van Buren, and he signed the treaty in October of 1837. And then in the next month, it came back to us for our final signing. And we signed the treaty, and the ink wasn't even dry before the negotiators turned and said, we want another treaty. And so we did. We signed another treaty in 1838, November 1838, just a year later. By this time, the Great Miami Reserve, that white in the middle of what is now Indiana, or even then, what was Indiana, that white was the only tribal land that we had left. We had some of the individual reserves still, but the Great Miami Reserve was the only Miami tribal land, about 500,000 acres. You can see on the map that Kokomo today is right in the middle of the Great Miami Reserve. So that gives you a sense of where that was. But there were some other pieces of this treaty that were also significant. The treaty, for the first time, allowed for us to consider going west. We did not say we would go, but we said we would consider it. Now, we hadn't done that before at all, but we put that into the treaty. We agreed to think about it. The other piece of that treaty was that if we were to be removed, our principal chief, Pinjewa, Jean-Baptiste Richardville, would be exempted from removal. He and his family would be allowed to stay in Fort Wayne and receive their annuities in Fort Wayne. And we kind of have to wonder why. Why did he ask for it? Why did they agree to it? But the treaty actually tells us why. He was old. He was 77 at the time, which today I don't think that's old. But in 1838, that was old. There were very few, particularly Myaamiaki men, who were living to that age. There were very few people living in what is now the United States who were living to that age at that time. It was old, and his health was not good. And it was really considered that if he was removed, there he is. If he was removed, he wouldn't make it. He would not survive. This is not taken in 1830. He's a much younger man in this photo. So we signed the treaty of 1838. And then in 1840, we signed another treaty. And in that treaty, we agreed to exchange the Great Miami Reserve for land that was supposed to be about the same size west of the Mississippi. What they had been asking for from us since 1826, 14 years, we agreed to. And we also agreed that we would be removed to that land west of the Mississippi. So why? Why the change? Why did we agree to go west? I think there were many, many reasons, but I want to point out one. Over the previous dozen years or so, our Miami leaders who were experienced on our national council had been dying gradually over those years. By 1840, only 3 of those leaders the elder experienced leaders were still living. All the rest of our National Council were young, a lot of them in their 30s. One of the experienced leaders, Myaamiaki, died in March of 1840. On May 1st, 1840, Palanswa, Francois or Francis Godefroy, died. Now, Palanswa was second chief. Pinjewa, Richardville was the principal chief, and Palanswa was the second chief. Today, we might have called him a vice chief. And it seems pretty clear, though it was never explicit, but it seemed pretty clear that Pinjewa was preparing Palanswa to be the new principal chief. He was considerably younger than Richardville, and he would be able to take over. He had a lot of experience. He was well trained. He would be able to take over. But May 1st, 1840, he died. And Richardville is looking at who is going to carry my people forward? Who's going to help them? I think he saw the handwriting on the wall that removal was inevitable. We were the only tribe left in Indiana. Everyone else had removed west. And if we were going to have any kind of move that was going to be at all successful, at all saving Miami people, he saw that he was the only one who could do it. And I believe this because within 3 weeks after Palanswa Godefroy died, Richardville went to the negotiators and said, I want to sign a removal treaty. He saw no hope for us to survive as a nation if we stayed in Indiana. The treaty also provided additional exemptions from removal. Palanswa, Francois Godefroy, as I mentioned, he had died earlier that year. His will provided for his lands. He had vast, vast land holdings. Only Richardville had more land holdings among Miami people. And his will said none of those lands could be sold until his youngest child turned 21. His youngest child was 4 years old. It was going to be a long time before that land could be sold. What happens if that family is removed west and nobody's here to protect their lands? Nobody's here to make sure that they are able to keep their lands. Their lands would have been sold right out from under them. They would have lost their inheritance. And so the descendants, the heirs of Palanswa, were exempted from removal. Also exempted was the Myaamiaki band. We've got a photo right here that's taken from that. Myaamiaki, his band was, they lived separately from a lot of Miami people. They had the only remaining village reserve. They didn't have debts. Many Miami people had great debts. They had no debts to speak of. And they kept to themselves. And so it was thought that they would be fine. They wouldn't be any trouble to anybody if they stayed. So the Myaamiaki band was also exempted from removal. But you know, nobody wanted to go. The National Council members, all of them signed, but no one wanted to go. We had 5 years to remove, and we kept coming up with reasons not to go this year. We've got to harvest our crops. We can't go now. I haven't sold my private land. I can't go yet. We just kept putting it off and putting it off. As we came near the end of the 5 years, Myaamiaki, also known as Francis Slocum, and this picture is right here. Makonzakwa got an exemption for herself and her family. And one of the things that she said of why she should get that exemption was that she had her own land, she had her family to help take care of her and her land. They were able to take care of themselves, and they should be allowed to remain. And it passed through Congress, and she got the exemption. Well, you know, a lot of other tribal citizens, especially the leaders, all had land also. And they thought, hey, it worked for her. And so they started putting in petitions to get exemptions as well. They were still fighting for that in September of 1846. US soldiers arrived to force us to remove. Now, as soon as they heard that the soldiers were here, some people, particularly the people from Wawiyasitas and Pepaquichas, also known as Flat Belly, the people from their bands and the Pigeon family from Turtletown, they said, we're out of here. We're not going west, we're going north. And they fled north to seek refuge among the Pokagon Potawatomi in Michigan. But the soldiers started rounding us up, and they were forcing us to go to Peru, Indiana, to a prison camp. And they held us in that camp for a few days in early October. And then on October 6th, 1846, and I will do the math for you, that's 175 years ago last month, 5 boats on the Wabash and Erie Canal left with about 325 Myaamiaki, Miami people. The canal boats took us east. You can see the brown line there taking us east. As we went, we passed our villages. We passed some of our homes. We passed our reserve lands. And for many people, they knew it was the last time they would ever see their homes. By the next day, we were passing through Fort Wayne, and we must have remembered, yes, we used to live here. It used to be Kikayonga. And then we went on into what is today Ohio, what was then Ohio, and we switched from the Wabash and Erie Canal to the Miami and Erie Canal. And we took the canal south to Cincinnati. That was the end of the line for the canals. And so at Cincinnati, they transferred us to a steamboat on the Kanzenzapiwe, the Ohio River. The steamboat was called the Colorado. So this is Cincinnati. It's a photograph that was taken in 1848, so less than 2 years after we were there. You can imagine that Cincinnati probably looked very much like this when we arrived. They brought us from the canal down Main Street. This right here on the left, that's Main Street. And they brought us to the public landing, to the steamboat Colorado. Now, neither of these is the Colorado, as far as I know. I can imagine that the one on the right here, a lot plainer, less, it's just not as fancy as the other one. I'm sure that that was more like what we were on. I don't know what the Colorado looked like, but it couldn't have been too much. So every day in Cincinnati, the newspapers published the shipping news. And that was what items have come into Cincinnati on the canals, what items are leaving Cincinnati on the steamboats. And I want you to see what that looked like the day that we arrived and left. Daily receipts by the Miami Canal, 134 barrels of whiskey, 218 barrels of flour, 10 sacks of 115 pounds of wool, 8 barrels of varnish, 2 Indian ponies. Miami Indians, 225 over and 78 under 8 years old. 49 perch stone, 4 pigs, etc., etc. And shipments to St. Louis by the Colorado, 30 tons of dry goods, 32 casks of government store, 350 Indians with their baggage. We were not passengers on these boats. We were cargo, just like the varnish and the pigs. So we went on the Ohio River on the Colorado. We went west, and then we went north on the Mississippi River. Now, we had been sick on the boats. We were not used to boat travel anymore. Our ancestors before them had been, but they were not at this time used to riding on boats. And people were very sick. But on October 18th on the Mississippi River, we had our first death. It was an infant from Wawiyasita's band. Now, if you remember, I said that the people from Wawiyasita's band fled north, but apparently not all of them, because this family was on the boat. I think about this Wawiyasita woman and her baby. What must she have felt on that boat, holding her dead baby in her arms? She must have thought, why am I here? Why didn't I flee with the others? And fled. Maybe my baby would still be alive. We don't know why she didn't flee. We know that there were babies born on the boat. So maybe this baby was actually born on the boat and she was 9 months pregnant. Can't really run very well when you're 9 months pregnant. But even if the baby had already been born, trying to run and flee with a babe in her arms, she must have thought the boat was safer for her child. But now she's holding her dead baby, waiting to bury him. 2 days later, on October 20th, another death. An elder man this time. His name was Ottawa. And later that same day, we arrived at St. Louis. But they didn't take us in St. Louis. They put us on a sandbar called Bloody Island. And it was on Bloody Island at the very edge of Myaamiaki. If you remember that first map, the Mississippi River was the edge of Myaamiaki, the edge of familiar land to us. They buried Ottawa and the Wawiyasita infant. And they said our traditional funeral ceremony for them. Now, they were on Bloody Island for 3 days. The Colorado was a good steamboat for the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers, but the Missouri River is very shallow and it was too big for the Missouri. And the removal contractors hadn't planned ahead well enough to arrange for another boat to take us on the Missouri. So we had to wait 3 days until they found the Clermont #2 steamboat. And then we headed west on the Missouri River. And while we were on the Missouri River, there were 4 more deaths, all children. We arrived on November 1st at the Kansas Landing, also known as the Westport Landing, in the town of Kansas, today's Kansas City, Missouri. From there, we went overland south 50 miles to the Miami reservation. There was one more death on that last leg of the journey, a 16-year-old boy. You can see I outlined the Miami reservation, and you can see that we were near the reservations of our relatives, other tribes that had been near us in Indiana were now near us in Kansas. It was a hard winter. We think it's cold right now for November. It was really cold early November that year, unusually cold. We had all been sick. The report is that 2/3 of us were sick while we were on the Missouri River. That's 200 people. I can't even imagine having 200 people sick on a boat all together. It's unimaginable. But we get to Kansas, and many of us are still sick. There are no houses for us. All we have to live in are tents. We're sick, it's cold, we have no homes to live in, and people are dying. From October 6th in Peru until the end of 1846, at least 30 Myaamiaki died. Now that's about 10% of those who left on removal died within those first few months. We don't know the names of most of the people who died. We know Ottawa, who was buried on Bloody Island, and we know one other name, Shapakana, also known as Thomas Godfrey. Now, Thomas was a son of Palonswa, so he was exempted from removal. He didn't have to go. Thomas was 16 years old. To understand why he wanted to go, you have to know a little bit about Miami families. In a Miami family, my father's brother's children and my mother's sister's children are not cousins. There are sisters and brothers, yes. And they were not exempted. They were not heirs of Palonswa, so they were not exempted. And even people who lived in their household but were not blood relatives were not exempted. So people that he loved, people he had grown up with, they were being forced to be removed. And as we know, as a 16-year-old boy, he wanted to go and protect them and take care of them and make sure that they got there safely. And his mother agreed to let him go as long as he would come back. But on December 24th, 1846, we have a letter from Tupia, Francis LaFontaine, who at that time was our principal chief. And the letter said, Thomas Godfrey is very sick. His recovery is doubtful. A month later, January 31st, 1847, we have a letter from Seca Cueta. Seca Cueta was Palonswa's widow, Thomas's mother. She wrote this after she heard that Thomas had been dying and had died by this time. And she writes, I do assure you, it is a pang to my heart. And what I feel so bad is that he died without my seeing him. She blamed Joseph Sinclair. He was the American removal agent, and he is the one that promised her that if she let Thomas go, he would make sure that Thomas got back safely. And Seca Cueta continued, it was under that promise that I consented to let him go. But God's will be done. I relied on him as a white man of honor and a father to us. But he belied me. It was a hard winter. But then we began building houses. We started businesses. We had a mill. We had a blacksmith shop. And we started to create a better life for ourselves and for our children. And life did get better. for a while, life was really good there for us, better than it had been in a long time. But then Americans started coming and squatting on our land. Sound familiar? Same story. We couldn't get them off our land. American soldiers had trouble getting them off our land. Kansas became a state. And when a state is new, they have no money. So they got this great idea. All of these tribal lands that were right there, right by them, they would just incorporate those into Kansas, and then they could tax the land. They couldn't do that. These are sovereign nations. They can't take them into their state. And of course they couldn't, but we had to go to court and fight it. And then in the early 1860s, there was the Civil War. Now, I don't know what you were taught in school about the Civil War, but when I was taught so many years ago, nobody told me that a big part of the Civil War was fought on the Missouri border, right here. Today they say the Missouri-Kansas border. I'm telling you right now, it was not the Kansas border, it was tribal lands. They were fighting right on our land and the land of other tribes. One battle was right up in the northwest corner, just outside our tribal reservation border. And to get to that battle, the Missouri bushwhackers rode right through our tribal lands. And they were terrifying. We'd heard stories about what the bushwhackers had done on the lands of other tribes. And we wanted nothing of it. That battle that was just north, it was only 5 miles from our homes. Our women were afraid to go in the fields. Miami women were traditionally the farmers, but now they were afraid to do their farming, because what if they were in the field and those bushwhackers came through? What would happen to them? Things had gotten bad. And so after the Civil War, when the US government wanted us to remove a second time, we agreed. We would go south this time to Indian Territory. Today, it's northeastern Oklahoma. It took us about 15 years to make that removal happen because we didn't all go together like we had before. A family here and a family there, and maybe a couple of other families over the course of 15 years until we were all there. And that's where the tribe was headquartered. That's where the tribe was. We established a village, a town called Myaamiaki. I'm going to jump ahead in time now to 1936. The Oklahoma Indian Welfare Act was passed. And under that act, the Miami tribe reorganized as a sovereign, federally recognized Miami tribe of Oklahoma. Now, under that, we ratified our Constitution in 1939. 1939, the Constitution said that those who were in Oklahoma and were on the list of those in Oklahoma were allowed to be citizens of the tribe. Now, we were a divided people. We had people in Oklahoma. We had people still in Kansas. And as I told you, we had people still in Indiana, but only those in Oklahoma in northeastern Oklahoma could be citizens. But in 1996, the tribe amended the Constitution and added another role of Miami, another list of Miamis, and anyone who descended from either of those two lists could now be citizens of the tribe. And that opened up citizenship to Indiana Miamis. I am an Indiana Miami. I am a descendant of Palanswa and Secaqueta, and I am a citizen of the Miami tribe of Oklahoma because in 1996, that amendment allowed me to do so. We'd always had a lot of back and forth from Indiana to Kansas, Indiana to Oklahoma. There were lots of back and forths, but now we have the opportunity to be one people again. But we are still divided. Those are still our three population centers: northeastern Oklahoma, eastern Kansas, northeastern Indiana. But we really have citizens who live all over the United States and even internationally. And what happens when you are divided and you have just a few Miami people here and a few there? We began to assimilate to the cultures around us. And what happens with that is that then we begin to lose our own culture. Much of our culture went to sleep, particularly in the 20th century. Our language went to sleep. Our last fluent speakers died in the 1960s. But in the 1990s, we began a cultural revitalization. We revitalized our government in 1939, and in the 1990s, we started revitalizing our culture. Today, the Miami tribe of Oklahoma has our seat of government in Miami, Oklahoma. By that constitution we passed in 1939, we are governed by the General Council. Now, the General Council is any citizen of the tribe who's 18 years or older and comes to the annual meeting and votes. We vote for our elected leaders. These are our current elected leaders. The gentleman in the center in the bright blue shirt is our current chief, Douglas Lankford. And these are our other leaders. But they are not elected to tell us what to do. They're not presidents, they're not kings. They are servant leaders. And their job is to do what we tell them to do. That's the other thing that we do at our annual meeting is we say to them, this is what we want you to do in the next year. An example, some years ago, someone stood up at the annual meeting and said, we need to do more for our veterans. And so during the course of the next year, they initiated particular benefits for our veterans. They heard what was told, what the people wanted, and they did it. And I got to tell you, if they came to the annual meeting the next year and said, we decided not to do that, yeah, they're not going to get reelected because their job is to do the will of the people. So we are a sovereign nation. We provide services for our people. We have a police force in Miami, Oklahoma. We issue license plates for Miami citizens who live in Oklahoma. Doesn't work in Indiana. In the state of Indiana is not going to allow that. But in Oklahoma, you can have a license plate from the tribe rather than from the state. We have social services for our people. We have a preschool for our children, and we have many services for our elders and veterans. Miami Nation Enterprises is the economic political arm of the tribe. Through MNE, we own a diverse portfolio of companies. We have companies that make cabinetry, that do construction contracting, software development, electronics utilities work, government contracting. And in the town of Miami, Oklahoma, we also have 2 small casinos. The funds from these businesses pay for our government, the operation of our government, and they pay for the revitalization of our culture. Part of that revitalization is getting us together, giving us opportunities to come together as Miami people. So in addition to our annual meeting, one of the big meetings that we have, one of the gatherings, lately it's been by Zoom, but when we can, we will come back together again for a winter gathering. One of the highlights of our winter gathering is storytelling. We are blessed to have stories that have been passed down to us from our ancestors. But they went to sleep. And so our elders, who should be the storytellers, were never told those stories. And so you can see our storytellers today are young people. But we all know that one day they will be the elders, and they will be passing those stories on to their children and grandchildren. At that winter gathering, we also like to dance. We have a stomp dance. It's a traditional dance that we lost, but we got it originally from our Shawnee relatives. And so they helped us to bring it back to life. And so we love to stomp dance as well. I said our language went to sleep. Our last fluent speakers died in the 1960s. But language revitalization was a huge part of the 1990s revitalization. It is through our language that we really can understand our culture. And so we're starting to teach our language to our people again. We have an online dictionary. We have a language learning app. We have classes, now online, but also in person when we can, to teach our language to our people. We have camps for our young people. 1 week in Oklahoma, 1 week in Fort Wayne every year. Again, right now online, but I'm really hoping that this year we'll be able to do it in person, because part of it is coming together as Miami people. The strings there, they do that every year at camp for the children to understand how they are connected to each other as Miami people. At the camp, they sing songs in the Miami language to help them learn how to count or how to greet. They learn about plants and how we use them and what we called them. They learn about our history, about our culture. They learn what it means to be Myaamiaki, Miami people. And I am just thrilled that now some of our youngest Miami children are starting to learn Myaamiata Wenge right next to English. They're learning it at the same time. I have great hope that in a couple of generations, we will once again have fluent speakers of the Miami language. We like to play. We like to play games that we have been playing since time immemorial. When we've encountered the French up in Wisconsin and in Illinois, they wrote down, the Jesuits wrote down everything about us. And they wrote down about seeing us play the same games that we're playing today. We love to play Peketahaminge. And I don't know if any of you can look closely and see what this is. It's lacrosse. Lacrosse, the Iroquois claim that they invented it. I'll give it to them. But it spread so fast. Tribes all over the northeastern part of what's now the United States were playing lacrosse. And we love it. We play, for a long time, we were playing with modern kinds of sticks. But now my colleague has learned how to make traditional style sticks. There are some in museums, so we know what they look like. He's made these. And now when we play, everybody plays with the traditional style stick. We've always played in a traditional way. We play with everybody. Anybody who wants to play can play. Men and women, boys and girls, all ages, all together. That's Chief Langford in the middle there trying to catch the ball with his stick. His grandchildren are also there playing. We all play. We all love it. No pads, no helmets. I don't think everybody even has shoes on there. And that's okay. By the way, in modern lacrosse, they've got this big goal. Our goal is a sapling. You have to hit the sapling with a ball. Yeah. So it's a challenge, but it's so much fun. We play that every time we get together all summer. Other games that we still play, Senzawenge is a dice game. You toss that bowl and the dice come up, and how they fall, you get points. And when you get to 10 points, you win. Sometimes you can get 10 points, first person, first turn, and they win. I've also seen games go on for 2 or 3 hours. So it's a fun game. And Makasina, if you can hear Makasina, yes, moccasin does come from that. And we originally played them with moccasins. Now we use these hot pads. But it's a pebble hiding game. You know, hide the pebble and who can find it. So this side, she has hidden the pebble under one of the pads. And it was his job. You can see his stick to toss the pad up in the air. If you can see right there, he found the pebble. It's a marble, but that's okay. And we love to play this. They were originally gambling games. Gambling was quite a different thing in those days. You would, if you want to play, you come and you bring something you've got extra. You've got an extra bow, you bet it. You got an extra pair of moccasins, you bet it. Everybody brings what they want to bet. And then whoever wins takes it all. But one of our high values as Miami people is gift giving. And so the winner would then redistribute among the other players. So you might go home with a new pair of moccasins and you might go home with a new bow. And you know, the gambling just adds a little excitement to the game. So we've been playing those games since time immemorial, and we have continued to play them. I want to tell you also about our traditional art of ribbon work. Now, ribbon work is a sewing art, and it has been, it's done by tribes throughout the Great Lakes region. But what's unique about Miami ribbon work is that our patterns, and this is a design, this is a piece that was done about 200 years ago. All our patterns are diamond designs. We found that we could take silk ribbons, which we got in trade, and cut them and fold them and layer them and create these diamond patterns. This is just one design. There are many, many different designs. Today, we're teaching ribbon work again. Not only our women are doing ribbon work, our men as well, and young and old, you know, even young teenagers who have never sewn anything in their whole lives are learning to sew ribbon work. We also, though, are using these ribbon work designs. Before we had silk ribbons, diamond patterns were always important to us. They were on tattoos, they were on other kinds of, like a buffalo road might have something painted on it. So those designs were always important to us. And we are maintaining these designs, and we use them in new ways. So we have t-shirts with woodwork imprinted on them. We put them on our PowerPoint slides. We put them on the back of our cell phone cases. Other tribes do diamond designs, but we, as far as I know, are the only ones who do exclusively diamond patterns. We've not seen any Miami ribbon work that had anything other than a diamond pattern design. So it's exciting to revitalize this culture again. And as our women took old diamond designs, new technology of silk ribbons, and made these beautiful pieces, they would have been on the bottom of our skirts, the edge of our blankets, down the sides of men's leggings. New technology. Today, we're using our modern technology and imprinting them on our t-shirts and so on. So my work as Tribal Historic Preservation Officer is about our identity, who we are as Miami people. It's about our way of life, our unique perspective. It's tied to our language, our culture, our stories, our history. And it's about leaving behind what we have learned for the next generations. Mishinewe, thank you very much. And if you have questions, I am open to answering them, or trying to anyway. Questions? Yes.
Miami, Florida.
Well, probably not, but so Miami, Florida, here's the story I've heard. There was a man named Flagler from Ohio who put the railroads through Florida. At the end, they were going to call it Flagler City, and he said, no, don't call it that. He said, name it after that Indian tribe, and it became Miami. Now, there is a tribe in Florida that has a similar name to ours. So it probably was named after them. But being that he was from Ohio, it could have been named after us, but it has no connection to us whatsoever. Yes.
Times, Dayton, Ohio had a thing called Sunwatch.
Mhm. Yes,
Does that in any way overlap with our tribe?
we're not sure. Probably. Did we know them? Did we know about them? I don't know. As if I recall, they were in the maybe 1200s. And if they were, we were probably in this area by that time. Don't know exactly when we arrived in this area, but likely there was some overlap there, yes.
It was sure it was only used for 21 to 18 years.
Yeah.
And it's a fine example of depleting the land around you.
Across Indiana, remote on Indiana.
Oh, huh. Don't know how it got its name. Yeah. Don't know. Yes.
I was gonna ask if you had any information about when Chief Oceana went down to Defiance along the Great Miami River, that camp down there.
What was the name, Chief?
Chief Oceana.
I don't know that name.
So Mr. Machine, that's grandfather.
Oh, his grandfather.
Yeah.
Oh,
That senior, his grandfather was Oceana.
oh, Osandia. I think it was Osandia, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When they went down to that, before they went to Piqua, or they were down to Defiance. Do anything about that?
Not specifically. I mean, I know that they were the Mishingwamisha, Mitisania, and all. They were in Ohio at one point. Secaqueta, that I talked about. She was also from that area of Ohio. I don't know a lot of details about it, though. No.
Diane, this is Leslie. We
Yes.
got a question on chat. What is the status of federal recognition for Indiana, Miami?
They attempted to get federal recognition in the late 80s, I believe, and they were not able to do that. But now in 1996, as I mentioned in the Constitution, that opened up citizenship basically to anyone of Miami descent. And so, as I say, I'm in Indiana, Miami, and I am now a citizen of the Miami tribe of Oklahoma. And virtually any Miami, wherever we live, can enroll in the federally recognized Miami tribe of Oklahoma. Yes.
Secretary of Interior, and I can't think of her name, I'm embarrassed. Has she
Howland.
done any good things?
Yeah, things are, it's not big things, but slowly things are happening, and things are, especially in my work as Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, that's where a lot of the work that I do comes under the Department of Interior, and just seeing government agencies being a little more responsive to us. What else do you have? Yes.
I'd like to understand more about the relationship between the Miami and the WIA.
So as I say, we originated, we all came out of the water. And they, yeah, some Miami people went one way and the WIA went another. They, in the 1820s, they were removed west. There were a few who stayed, and then they, like a year or two later, they went west. A handful remained in Indiana and intermarried with the Eel River Miami. And so the WIAs who remained in Indiana are now Miamis. Those who left are now part of the Peoria tribe of Oklahoma.
How large were the Eel River tribes?
Pretty small. It was basically a small band. And were they Miami? Were they a separate tribe? Really was a political, they basically were a separate village, but then as the United States got involved and who are they going to pay for, negotiating treaties and all of that. So they were recognized as separate, but today they're just Miamis. Yeah. Yes.
Photos, it shows the wearing Western clothing. Why is that?
Are these in these photos? Okay, today we, yeah, we just dress like everyone. Over time, we adopted European dress often with a twist. Let me see if I can go back. I didn't show you this. I neglected to show you. So this is Seca Cueta, and on the one hand, her clothing is very much like other women of her time in Indiana would have dressed. But there are certain things, her earrings would have been more traditional from Miami. Polka dots, oh my gosh, we love polka dots. Lots of we chose polka dot fabrics. As long as we had annuity money, we got the best clothing, the best fabrics. Our clothing, do we have? No, we don't have anything here. Actually, I think if you look at the one photo back there, Jim Godfrey, you can see a little bit of ribbon work on his clothing. So it was a mix of Western clothing and our own flair to it. There's a drawing by James Otto Lewis at an early period in the 1820s of Palanswa. We've got Palanswa over here by George Winter, but some years earlier, I believe it was 1826. And so he's got a kind of a French style shirt and jacket thing. And then he's got leggings with ribbon work down the side. So, you know, we took what we liked from them and we kept what we wanted. And that's kind of been our way. Yeah.
How many driver in each state? do you need? Like how many Indiana versus Kansas? Sure, Oklahoma has the most now.
I think Oklahoma has about 1,000. We have, last count I heard was 820 in Indiana. Kansas has something less than that. And then after that, I mean, you know, spread the rest. We have about 6,000 citizens. So you spread the other, you know, 4,000 over the, actually, there's a big group in Washington State. A couple of families went up there and had a lot of children. What else? Yes. Mhm.
But in studying the George Winter collection quite a bit, I noticed that those men who were considered warriors, ancestor, others, Potawatomis, like they would wear a sash that would be red.
Hmm.
That have any significance to show they were particularly high in the hierarchy of warriors?
It would not have been that, but you notice the ribbon work, red and black and white. Apparently we like those colors because we use them a lot in our ribbon work and so it may be something like that. Yeah. But I don't know of any particular significance in that context. Also, by this time, this is the 1830s. None of us were actually warriors. None of us were actually fighting. Our last battles were the War of 1812, and we hadn't had battle since then. So Palanswa, Francois Godefroy was known as the last war chief, in part because his role as second chief kind of incorporated war chief, except there was no war.
Diane, we've got a question from the Zoom audience.
Yes.
Does Miami history document the Battle of Mississinewa 1812?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So I will tell you that story as briefly as I can. So there was an attack on the fort at Fort Wayne, and the Potawatomi were involved, and probably a few Miami, was not sanctioned by the National Council, but you know, you can't control what your individual people do, right? So there were some Miamis, but mostly it was a Potawatomi attack on Fort Wayne. Well, William Henry Harrison, who was, I believe he's governor of the Indiana Territory at the time. But anyway, he was gonna, you know, he wanted to stop that. And so we knew we were in trouble. And so we fled from Fort Wayne and from other villages in the north down to the Mississinewa. Our Delaware grandfathers already had a village down there, and we just joined them down there, kind of hide out. We don't want to be a part of this war. You know, Tecumseh wanted us to fight with him. William Henry Harrison said, "You better not." And Tecumseh said, "You don't fight with us, and we will crush you." So we just like, no thanks. We don't want to be a part. We're done fighting. We had that battle of the Treaty of Greenville. We don't want to fight anymore. So we went to the Mississinewa to escape and just live in peace. But the U.S. sent, Henry Harrison sent the army, and they attacked our villages on the Mississinewa. Most of our men were out hunting, so most of the people in the village were women, children, and elder men. They took, in the first village, or the first few villages that they attacked, they took 34, mostly women and children, prisoner, and held them there. When our men heard about it, because some people had fled and word spread to the other villages, and our men heard about it, they had council at the confluence of the Mississinawa and the Wabash rivers. And they decided we have to try to rescue our people. And so that night they gathered around the village where the army was. And at dawn, they attacked. They weren't able to rescue the women and children. The Americans fled with their prisoners and into Ohio and claimed that they had won a victory. So anything you read in American history says that they won. I don't know, if you retreat, is that a win? So that's the short version of the Battle of the Mississinawa. Yeah.
A Winnebago tribe near Paramount, Indiana. They would have a battle up in that area, you know, much you wouldn't have known about it.
Not sure. I don't really know a whole lot about tribes that aren't us.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't know anything about that. That seems odd, but who knows? Yeah. They would.
There is just 1% of the whole story from some small festival that was around that. You know where Paramount is.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Did you say, what would you say? Paramount. Yeah.
Frankfurt and
In Carroll County. Yeah, I know where that is. Yeah. But I don't know that story.
Diane, we have another question from the
Okay.
Zoom audience. Can you talk a little bit about the oral history of the Miami and the French in general and at Kikianga?
Oral history. Much of our history was either our oral history or it was written down by the French. I'm not sure exactly what they're thinking that they would, the questioner wants to know about it. But we do have stories about trading with the French throughout the region, not just here at Fort Ouiatenon, but in Fort Wayne and in other areas. And for the most part, we had a good relationship with them. They were our fathers. You might have heard me say that the Delaware were our grandfathers. The Potawatomi and the Shawnee were our elder brothers. The Wea and the Piankashaw and the Peoria were our younger siblings. We had political relationships were looked at as kin kind of relationships. So the French were our fathers. And what does a Miami father do? What's his role? His role is to give good gifts to his children. The father is not the disciplinarian in a Miami family. He's the one that is loving and takes care of his children and gives them gifts. And so the French were our father. They're supposed to give us good gifts, like good trade deals, right? So we weren't happy with them when they didn't give us such good deals because they're not being a good father. If they have something more specific, I'll be happy to address that.
Diane, I've got another question from the
Uh-huh.
Zoom audience.
Okay.
Are there any living descendants of Francis Slocum?
Are there any, she asked, are there any living descendants of Francis Slocum, the Makunzakwa? Yes, I believe so. I'm not the genealogist, but I'm trying to think who, well, I know there are. In fact, some of them would be my relatives too, because Makunzakwa's granddaughter, Elizabeth, was the second wife of my great-grandfather. And I descend from the third wife, but they would still be our relatives. So I can't tell you, but yes, there are descendants. Yes.
What about cuisine? Are there any kind of traditional recipes that have been passed along?
There are some within a few families that have been passed along. More often, the cuisine we have now is what they developed in Oklahoma. Like every tribe in existence, I think today in the United States, we do fry bread. Because that's what you could do. You got flour, you got water, and you got oil. Fry bread. There are things like grape pudding, or grape dumplings, they call it, which are more traditional. Persimmon pudding, that's good stuff. But a lot of what again, that was part of the culture that went to sleep. But we are working on revitalizing some of that as well. It takes time to revitalize everything. What else? Yes.
Cheating with the internet here. Does Aya mean hi or hello?
Aya,
Am I saying it right?
Aya, yes.
So Aya Nika means hi, my friend.
Hi, my friend, Aya Nika, and you can say that to me, but you can't say it to him.
Okay, thank you.
You can, oh, it's gender-based.
Oh,
Women to women, men to men.
oh, you can't say that a man is your friend if you're a woman?
There isn't a way to do it. Yeah. I mean, yeah. and in the earlier culture, it wouldn't have been necessary because you didn't have that. Men and women didn't associate except within their immediate families.
The women had probably wives, other wives too, in that family.
Sometimes, not always. Yeah. But the women were in charge of the house because the men were out. They were hunting, fishing, trading, going to war, and the women ran the villages. And we built the houses, so they were ours. No, we weren't. It's just that we had divided roles.
So daddy got to come home and bring presents and everybody.
Yeah, and because those relationships with your aunts and your uncles, those aunts and uncles whose children were your siblings, that's because those aunts and uncles are also your parents.
Right.
And they're the disciplinarians, not your biological father.
Thank you, Diane,
Oh.
for coming in. Really appreciate it. Diane will be around. We can have some truths here and so forth. What you saw today is representation of what the mission is at Tippecanoe County Historical Association. We're in a part of the country that has incredible history. And our mission is to preserve, curate, and then spread and share the stories, just like you heard today through Diane and other speakers with that. So if you're interested in TCHA on our website, how to become a member and find out what other programs we have going on that share that mission, feel free to join us. Thank you very much for coming, Diane. Thank you very much for being here.
You're welcome.